Starting off this countdown, we have the Den of Snakes. Some abandoned locations are more dangerous than others. You really don't know what you're getting into when you enter them. Maybe the floors will just give in under your feet. Or in this case, maybe you'll be greeted by some slithery friends. A group of urban explorers visited an abandoned mansion in their town, and when they got inside, they found a family of snakes living underneath the couch. Even if they were harmless, I don't want those things lurking anywhere near me, no thank you. But it could have been worse. Could have been a den of poisonous snakes. Moving on at number 9, we have the Somewhere House. A pretty famous abandoned home for urban explorers is called the Somewhere House. It was named by the person who discovered it. Obviously he didn't want to expose the location of the house, so he just titled it Somewhere. Now it's been named the mid-century time capsule house, because if you enter this house, you feel like you've been transported back in time to the 1960s and 70s. The style and decor of the house reflects those time periods. So back in 2015, the urban explorer Freaktography was searching this house when he came across a safe in one of the rooms. Hoping to find money or valuables, he opened it up. But what he found scared the crap out of him. In the safe was a note that read, "Danger, MK1 hand grenade inside. This is not a joke. Bob Jr." And sure enough, the grenade was still there. The explorer then carefully closed the lid and got the heck out of there. Definitely don't want to risk setting that baby off. I just want to know why there was a grenade in the safe in the first place, and who is Bob Jr.? In our 8th spot, we have the Well. Some fancy mansions have a full bar in their basements. Others have a nice home movie theater. But this old abandoned house had something quite different in their basement. A well. Now in pre-1940 homes you may find this to be a thing, but there was something off about this well. For starters, the well was blocked off by a trap door, as if someone was thrown down there and then the well was sealed off so they couldn't get out, or so that visitors couldn't hear their screams for help. Or it was blocked off so that Pennywise can't crawl back out of there. In our 7th spot, we have The Spirit Lives. Back in 2015, YouTuber and urban explorer Freaktography was exploring abandoned homes in Ontario. While in southwestern Ontario, he found a mansion with some very unsettling things. So in this house, he found an old box with the words "The Spirit Lives" written on it. Inside of it were dozens of photos of an old dead woman lying in her casket. Now I know that back in the day it was a tradition to send loved ones photos of the dead in their caskets if they couldn't attend the funeral, but those photos are just so unnerving. Also in the box were condolence cards and programs from the funeral service. I mean, what makes it so creepy is how the box was labeled "The Spirit Lives." Makes it seem like if you open this box, then her soul is just going to escape. Making our way down the list, number 6, we have the Mannequin. So not all abandoned places are going to be terrifying, but some people, with nothing else better to do, get a little creative and have a little fun at these abandoned locations. And by this, I mean purposely setting up the house to terrify its next visitors. So in one abandoned mansion, an explorer found a mannequin hanging from the ceiling by a rope around its neck. Nearby was a ladder lying on the ground, making it look like the dirty old mannequin committed suicide. Yeah, that's enough to freak anyone out. Pretty creative though, I'm not gonna lie. Mannequins are creepy enough on their own, but this person just turned the creep factor to the extreme. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Tiger. A man in Houston went inside an abandoned home when he came across a frickin' tiger. This is reminding me of that scene from The Hangover. Apparently this guy wandered into the house to smoke some weed, but upon doing so, he found a tiger in the garage. When he called the police had to make sure that the dude wasn't just hallucinating from being high as a kite. But he was right. There was a tiger in the garage along with several packages of meat. Maybe Joe was just chilling out there with a tiger for a few days. Well, police ended up tranquilizing the tiger and took it to an animal shelter. They still don't know whose tiger it is and what it was doing in an abandoned house in the first place. Coming in at number 4, we have the Bunker. If you were able to design your own mansion, what would you want it to have? Maybe an indoor swimming pool or a slide from the top floor to the main floor? I personally would want a bunch of secret rooms and passageways. That would be so cool. Now I ask because this next abandoned mansion had a secret bunker in the basement. Inside they found a supply of food, water, and equipment. But it looked as if whoever was there left in a hurry and just grabbed as much supplies as they could. Why did they have to flee? What happened to them? And where did they disappear to? Someone answer my questions. In our third spot, we have these skeletons. There's a saying about people having skeletons in their closet, but of course this is just an idiom, meaning maybe they've done something bad in their past that they are ashamed of and keep hidden from others. But in this next case, this abandoned mansion literally had skeletons in its closet. So upstairs in the master bedroom, an urban explorer came across a chest in the closet. Thinking it's like a pirate treasure chest, he opened it, only to find a large assortment of bones. But there wasn't just one chest, there were multiple, all filled with bones. Thinking that the previous owner was some sort of serial killer, he fled the scene of the crime. A couple days later, he returned to the same spot with a group of his friends, but this time the boxes of bones were gone. Okay, that's really creepy. Like, whose bones are those? Are they human or are they animal bones? And where did they disappear to? In our second spot, we have the Resident. A group of urban explorers decided to go check out an abandoned mansion in their town. The mansion was badly vandalized and as creepy as they expected it to be. However, after looking around the house for quite some time, they saw someone run by one of the doors. Thinking that someone was living in the old abandoned mansion, they fled. However, when reviewing some photos and videos that they took of the mansion, they realized that the person living there wasn't alive. No, it was a ghost. In one of the photos you could see a dark figure lurking at that same doorway. After seeing that, they all agreed to never go back to that mansion ever again. It's not worth pissing off a ghost and getting possessed by it. And in our number one spot, we have the Doctor's Mansion. Brian Sansevero, urban explorer and photographer, ended up finding an abandoned mansion that once belonged to a wealthy doctor. But this doctor didn't work at a hospital. No, he worked out of his house. In fact, sections of his house were converted into a waiting room, examination room, and procedure room for his patients, meaning people probably ended up dying in his very own home. That's not even the creepy part. When you first walked into the house, you are greeted by a skinned wolf carpet. Then in the medical rooms there are bottles of mysterious liquids, old medicine, and creepy medical tools. I mean, the home is quite beautiful, minus the creepy hospital rooms it has. Starting off this countdown, we have the sarcophagus. Basically, this is a massive steel and concrete structure that covers the Chernobyl power plant. It was designed to help contain the radiation. The construction of the structure lasted for 206 days, and those working on it had to work in shifts of no more than 7 minutes. Any more time spent near the reactors would have killed them. But still, they did sacrifice their lives building this because thousands of workers still died from exposure to the radiation. Those that survived got severely ill, and majority of them developed cancer. Nowadays, the sarcophagus is still there, but it's beginning to crumble. In 2019, they were in the process of dismantling it because it was going to collapse. So a new one is currently being installed. That's probably the scariest thing in Chernobyl because of how deadly the building it's containing is. Coming in at number 9, we have the gas masks, and if you guys are liking this video or want to see part 3, then smash that like button. Chernobyl already looks like the place where an apocalypse occurred. Buildings are completely abandoned, run down, and overgrown with nature. What doesn't help is the piles upon piles of gas masks scattered all throughout Chernobyl. This really adds to the eeriness of this place, and again, makes it look like a place where a zombie or alien takeover occurred. In fact, there is one room inside a school which is just completely filled with child-sized gas masks. It's very creepy, but also sad. Like, imagine how frightened the young children were when this happened. The gas masks found there are just a sad reminder of the horrors that took place there when the reactor exploded. Moving on to number 8, we have the rotting toys. Littered all throughout the city are toys or personal belongings people had to leave behind. The saddest thing to see are pictures of children's toys left behind. Like, I just think that was probably someone's favorite little dolly. Go anywhere there and you'll find items scattered everywhere, now broken and covered in filth. Like, imagine you're rushed out of your home and have to leave behind all your personal belongings. That must have been so hard. I can't imagine how everyone must have felt. It's really depressing to think about. Moving on, at number 7 we have the examination chair. So this one is pretty strange, but somehow a gynecologist examination chair ended up in the middle of the woods outside of a hospital. Not only is that super weird, but it's also super creepy. It's all rusted and beat up and looks like an old torture device. Not only that, but that means someone had to go inside the abandoned hospital, find that chair, and then carry it all the way back down and into the woods. I got a lot of questions. Why would someone do this? And how long did it take them to do this? And again, why would someone do this? Either way, it makes for a very spooky encounter. Moving on, at number 6 we have the abandoned cooling tower. A partially constructed cooling tower can be found at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. They were built to evaporate the cooling water from the 2 new reactors. Sadly, they were never completed. Now, these things are massive. The diameter was over 120 meters and it stands at 150 meters tall. Obviously, after the accident, there was no need to continue on with the construction of this, so the government just left the towers there along with everything else. Eventually, over time, nature will have its way with it and it will start to erode and crumble. It's just crazy seeing all these abandoned infrastructures. Imagine how life would have been if that explosion never happened. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the toxic river. There's a river that's just filled with radioactive water right near the reactor. The scariest part is, despite how toxic the water is, a bunch of aquatic life live there. In particular, giant catfish. Yes, giant catfish. A video from 2016 shows a massive catfish swimming in the water. People originally were like, oh my god, what the heck is that? It must be some sort of mutated animal. Later, it was just found out to be a giant catfish. But still, what the heck? And it's the fact that they have adapted to be able to survive in that highly toxic water. Like, that just baffles me. Not only that, but they can thrive there because the water has no higher predators. Obviously though, you're not allowed to go fishing there. Okay, I feel like that's a given, but I also feel like people would still try it, so I'm just gonna say it. Don't go fishing there. In our 4th spot, we have the jarfish. Speaking of fish, we're gonna go with this. So back in 2016, photographer and journalist Miriam Wazer took a trip to explore the ruins of Chernobyl. While inside an abandoned building, she came across something very creepy and odd. She found a bunch of fish and other specimens in jars. Why someone was collecting fish, it just baffles many. And they weren't even like proper beakers or science mason jars. No, it looked like someone emptied out their jar of pickles and then used it to store the specimen. I think it's best if those remain untouched. Like, can you imagine how stinky they would be if they were open nowadays? They would reek. Old stinky fish is not something I would ever want to handle. Now, the other specimen beside the fish are unknown. No one knows what the heck they are. But if you know, let me know in the comments below. Coming in at number 3, we have the abandoned hospitals. The hospitals at Chernobyl are quite eerie. They're just filled with rusted, empty hospital beds, littered syringes, and more. The walls and floors are cracking, and there's dirt and questionable red marks on the floor. I think the saddest thing though is that these hospitals are often trashed with medical supplies just tossed everywhere. The days after the explosion happened, people were frantically rushing to hospitals. Hospital staff were overwhelmed by the amount of people there. This moment is still preserved in the hospitals to this day. It's pretty dark once you think about it. And at number 2 today, we have the Sad Alley. The Sad Alley, or the Alley of Memory, is an alley in the Ukraine created in memory of the villages and residents who had to flee from their homes during the disaster. Basically, it's a walkway with signs lining the sides. These signs are names of cities and villages that had to evacuate and leave everything behind. It's a way to ensure we just never forget the impact that this disaster had. It's really sad. And in our number 1 spot today, we have the radioactive spiders. Yes, you heard me correctly. Imagine if Peter Parker got bit by one of these bad guys. He'd be like a weirdly mutated Spider-Man or something like that. But anyways, the spiders in the exclusion zone are radioactive. so you definitely don't want to be bit by one. Oh wait, it gets worse. They also make radioactive webs. Yeah, you heard me, that's a thing. So you don't have to just worry about these spiders, but you have to worry about walking through their deadly webs. Like, what the heck? No thank you. Nuh-uh. I'm not a fan of spiders, but imagine radioactive ones. That sounds like it belongs in a horror movie. Radioactive, radioactive.
At number 10, we have Glendale Hospital. Now this hospital was one built in the 30s to help deal with the tuberculosis epidemic. The building was used in other ways as well until its closure in 1982 because of the high levels of asbestos in the building. Today, police patrol for trespassers, but that doesn't stop graffiti artists, curious teens, and ghost hunters from exploring the abandoned hospital. One local urban legend is that if you sneak inside the hospital, you will be chased by the ghosts of the patients who passed away in the building. A local resident said, "My friend went there and swears he saw a ghost watching him from the shadows. And after that, he won't go near that place anymore." Also, a group that went in to explore heard whispered responses to their questions through EVP, and they also heard thuds and bells. Lastly, they caught light anomalies on camera, and they said they couldn't really debunk them as being dust or bugs. On to number 9, Old Tool Hospital. This is also known as Asylum 49 because this old home for nursing and other things also is part-time an attraction. Nurses that used to work there claim that 3 different ghosts lived there as well: a nurse in white, a man in black, and a little girl. The nurse in white became known when nurses would visit patients who said they had already been visited by a nurse in white already, but there was no nurse that wore white at the nursing home. Next, the man in black was said to be a terrifying apparition that manifested at 3 in the morning. And lastly, there was a little girl that would show up when patients were soon to die. Children's laughter could be heard in the halls, and that tended to be a sign that patients would pass away soon. This pattern of 3 mirrors the rumor that patients died in groups of 3 at the now abandoned hospital. So, while ghost tours are available, be warned. The spirits there are said to scratch visitors or even call out to them by name. Number 8. Seaside Sanatorium. This fortress made of brick was designed in 1934 by architect Cass Gilbert. I mention this because it used Tudor Revival architecture, essentially massive terraces facing the sea that wrap around the main building, aiming to help get children that were there get more sun. As I mentioned before, that was a main method of treatment for TB at one point. Now, once treatments for TB improved, the use of the building changed. After being a sanatorium, it was a home for the elderly, and then a traditional medical hospital, and then lastly, a hospital for intellectually disabled people. Sadly, in its final form, the hospital staff were frequently accused of abusing patients, and the hospital became known for its high mortality rate. It closed in 1996. Now, the abandoned hospital is home to persistent rumors of paranormal activity. Teams that have investigated have caught different EVPs of children's laughter or spirit orb photographs. Some claim to see objects moving of their own accord or swing sets that appear to be in use when no one's on them. On to number 7, the McRaven House. So this one was built way back in 1797 in Mississippi, and the McRaven House has been called a time capsule of the South. There were expansions to the house in 1836 and 1849, but each edition left the initial construction untouched. So this house makes our list because it was a Confederate field hospital during the Civil War, and several residents passed away within the home. The former owner of the residence, John Bob, was murdered just outside the premises. But the most active spirit that haunts the house is said to be Mary Elizabeth Howard. She was originally the lady of the house. She died in 1836 shortly after giving birth in one of the upstairs bedrooms. Her presence is rumored to be behind a bedside lamp in her old room turning on and off, unexpectedly and just any time. Number 6, Rock Haven Sanitarium. This sanitarium opened in the 1920s and was one of the first to try kinder alternatives to the treatments that were given at the time. It was a woman's only asylum during a time when men could plead a woman's insanity during a divorce with little to no evidence. Obviously, a lot of people were sent to different asylums that were using much worse treatments, but those 2 reasons made this asylum very ahead of its time. So Rock Haven was bought by the city of Glendale in 2008, but it is essentially abandoned. Those who guard or take care of the property have reported unusual encounters though. They say they have seen lights switching on, clocks changing time, figures passing in front of windows, disembodied voices, knocking on the walls, and items appearing out of nowhere. The biggest item that has appeared out of nowhere is, amazingly, a piano. Before then, it was only seen in vintage photographs, but then there. One local historian gives tours of the property every once in a while, and he says that the hauntings are borderline pleasant. Must have been because it was a nicer asylum. Haunted though, nonetheless. On to number 5, St. Ignatius Hospital. The St. Ignatius Hospital operated from 1893 to 1964. It was a private hospital that struggled financially until it closed down. It was sold in 1968 and used as an assisted living facility. It was officially shut down and abandoned in 2000. Today, it is said that the ghosts of the former patients have reclaimed the halls of the hospital. One of the main ghosts is believed to be F.E. Martin, the hospital's first fatality. He unfortunately died after being crushed between 2 railroad cars. People who dare to visit have reported hearing strange growls and being attacked by unseen hands. At number 4, Central State Psychiatric Hospital. So this hospital originally opened in 1842 as Georgia State Lunatic, Idiot, and Epileptic Asylum. It was the first public psychiatric hospital in Georgia. A century after it opened, it swelled to 200 buildings across 2,000 acres. At its peak, it housed up to 13,000 patients. The treatments of the time are appalling. Lobotomies, electroshock therapy, straitjackets, and even children being confined to cages were methods used at the hospital. With the large numbers it housed and the mass graves nearby, it is no wonder that people have had paranormal experiences there. People report voices or strange sightings close to the graves where over 25,000 people are buried. The sightings are typically said to be simple visual anomalies, but golfers from nearby have also reported hearing screams from within the abandoned buildings. Additionally, passerby have felt strange as they come near the buildings with feelings they can't really explain. Number 3, Fairfield Hills State Hospital. This hospital opened in 1931 as a hospital to accommodate the overflow of patients from other nearby mental hospitals. Like other psychiatric hospitals we have talked about, the patients were treated harshly at the time. Until it was closed in 1995, the halls of the hospital were filled with stories of abuse, electroshock therapy, invasive experimental surgeries, suicides, and mysterious deaths. Eyewitnesses claim to have experienced hauntings within the walls. They have seen a dark, shadowy figure rounding corners quickly and have felt like they have eyes watching them. When they go to investigate, the figure had disappeared. Now the hospital is heavily guarded and trespassers are not welcome, so who knows what's going on inside. And number 2 is the Coon Memorial State Hospital. So the history of this hospital starts back in 1830. It was the Vicksburg, Mississippi hospital treating patients mainly diagnosed with smallpox. The hospital also served the wounded during the Civil War. It officially closed its doors in 1989, and although the new owners boarded up the property in the early 90s, trespassers quickly made their way into the buildings. Paranormal investigation groups have reported seeing full body apparitions and shadow figures roaming the building. They say you feel the presence of the past patients of the building as well. Many visitors also say they have heard the usual bangs, bumps, and footsteps commonly heard in spirited destinations. It is also known far and wide as a hotspot for paranormal activity, with groups that investigate apparitions and EVPs recorded there. While one group of ghost hunters were exploring the abandoned Coon Memorial State Hospital, they found the body of a missing woman. Lastly, number 1, Oklahoma Tuberculosis Sanatorium. The Eastern Oklahoma Tuberculosis Sanatorium was built in 1921 to care for patients with the disease. It was closed down in 1975 from a declining need for the facility, in part due to the new advancements in treatments. It is believed to be haunted by the spirits of the children who died while being treated. One Native American woman who was admitted to the sanatorium as a teenager lost many of her friends there. She remembers a moment when the janitor there, who also worked as a gravedigger, pointed to her and asked, "When will I be coming to you?" Also, during author Cheryl Pearson's research on the history of the sanatorium, she found out very disturbing information. Native American children used to be tested on for cures to tuberculosis at this hospital, most likely so cures for white children could be found. Those children who were tested on are believed to be the ones who haunt the abandoned ruins to this day.
Starting us off at number 10 is an abandoned carnival. Now, I have always known carnivals to be very upbeat and happy places, but I think it's safe to say after toxic radiation, they ain't so fun. Just a mile and a quarter away from the Chernobyl power plant is the small town of Pripyat. Pripyat was the town where most workers at Chernobyl lived and raised their families prior to the famous blast. Obviously, that is not the case anymore. What is now left of this once popular carnival is a decaying Ferris wheel, bumper cars surrounded by overgrown vines, and an old rusty skeleton of a merry-go-round. It is said that the amusement park was set to open on May 1st, just 5 days after the Chernobyl incident occurred, but the people of Pripyat needed something to do while the reactor was melting down, so the town opened up the amusement park on April 27th. How charming. Nothing more sweet and fun than you and your family enjoying a beautiful Ferris wheel ride that sweeps in and out of toxic radiation. It's the little things in life.
In our 9th spot today, we have the ghosts. A number of people lost their lives over this terrible disaster, and it's believed that their souls are still around, haunting Pripyat. This one story in particular will give you the chills. It was told by nuclear physicist Andrei Karsukov. He visited the area in 1997 and claims he encountered a ghost. So when he arrived, he went to the power station and went to the number 4 reactor. That's where the explosion occurred. Now, he was there taking radiation readings when all of a sudden he heard someone screaming for rescue from a fire coming from inside. He said that it was impossible for someone to be inside of the old reactor room. For starters, the door requires a password and a handprint. And not only that, it would have tripped an alarm if someone managed to get inside. Yet, the screaming was clearly coming from inside. It sounded like someone was desperately trying to escape. So he might have heard the ghostly cries from someone who lost their life in the power plant explosion. Isn't that scary? I think so.
Number 8, silhouettes of missing townspeople. Before I go any further on this one, let me just say that these silhouettes are not actually of real people left after the blast. A couple of sneaky and daring graffiti artists, said to be from Germany and Belarus, snuck into the radiation zone and thought it would be a good idea to spray paint silhouettes of people who once lived in this beautiful little community. So these pieces more or less resemble what once was rather than resembling actual humans from the town. That being said, there are some unique silhouettes through the radiation zone, such as a little girl with pigtails reaching for a light switch in a random abandoned room. Somewhere outside, a boy pulling a truck towards a corner of the building, as well as silhouettes of random people dancing, and to finish it off, a small group of children jumping together in terror of the blast. Pretty morbid, if you ask me. Whether these silhouettes are based on specific real people or not, these random silhouettes are definitely a haunting thing to see, and I don't want to see them.
Coming in at number 7, we have the Bloody Red. The Bloody Red, or the Red Forest, is the name given to the forest area around Chernobyl. Why is it called that? Well, this area received a lot of radiation fallout. As a result, the trees turned this bright orange color and then died. Nowadays, not a single tree can grow there anymore. In fact, this area is considered the most radioactive land area on the planet. Yes, on the planet. Obviously, as a result, the 400 hectares of land are off limits. It's strictly prohibited to go in there. I mean, duh, unless you have a death wish and want to die from exposure to radiation. What's also scary is that in 2015 a fire broke out in the forest, and even more radioactive material was released from this burning. So yeah, that forest is a big no-go zone. Also, could they have given it a creepier name like the Bloody Red? Really? Really?
Coming in at number 6 are piles of creepy dolls. Creepy dolls! I have seen plenty of horror films in my time, and nothing creeps me out more than a creepy, probably possessed old doll. All through Pripyat, piles of dolls and doll heads can be seen in the randomest of places. Everywhere from windowsills, piles of debris, bed frames, tree branches, literally everywhere. Now, some of these dolls may be left over from the blast, but odds are they are all placed there by cheeky horror fans wanting to place their own touch on the Chernobyl site. Some of these are even propped up in specific poses with gas masks on. Annabelle, if you're watching this, you stay in your glass box. You got that?
We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the Hospital of Death. This is said to be the deadliest hospital on the planet. So after the nuclear disaster, this hospital began quickly filling up with a number of sick and injured citizens. Nowadays though, obviously the hospital is abandoned. But the basement of the hospital contains a dark secret. In the basement, there are piles of first responders' clothing. These clothings belong to the first responders like the firemen who were on the scene immediately after the explosion. Obviously, the clothing they wore when they rushed into the building is now highly contaminated, and still to this day emit dangerously high levels of radiation. So they were just dumped in the basement because they didn't know where else to get rid of it. In fact, the radiation in this building is 4,000 times higher than normal. It's crazy.
Number 4, radiation-eating fungus. In the words of Jeff Goldblum, life finds a way. Currently, there is a fungus growing inside the damaged 4th reactor of Chernobyl where radiation levels are still insanely high. Discovered by scientists back in 2002, this fungus, when tested, showed that when exposed to higher ionizing radiation, it would actually grow faster. What happened to the tested fungus after? Who knows? Either way, I do wish I could have been there to test it with the other scientists because I hear they were some pretty fun guys. I'll show myself out.
In our 3rd spot today, we have the mutated animals. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster had devastating, lasting effects. The nuclear material leaked into the soil, contaminating food and water. In fact, the radioactive materials leaked into pastures and was eaten by cows, and then was later found in their milk that children were drinking. But let's talk more about these farm animals that were affected. There were tons of weird mutated animals born near the disaster zone after this incident. Pigs, goats, and horses were born with messed up faces and extra limbs, or were just weird colors. Nowadays, there's a lot of stray dogs that roam the area. Sadly, because of their exposure to the radiation, they don't live a long life, and they may have a number of health issues.
Coming in at number 2 is quite possibly the strangest but most obvious thing you will find in all of Chernobyl. Tourists! Apparently, around 12,000 tourists visit the exclusion zone every single year. One tourism company promises 11 hours of excitement with a respirator and a dosimeter included. There are even some nearby hotels that request you leave your radioactive shoes outside and don't bring them into the hotel with you once you return. No matter how safe or unsafe you think it is to visit the exclusion zone, quite obviously thousands of people from around the world go and visit every single year. Honestly, it does seem kind of cool, and I'm sure there's a gift shop somewhere that sells shirts that say, "I went all the way to Chernobyl and all I got was this shirt and an extra thumb." I'd buy that. Hey Lizzie, you want to go to Chernobyl with me?
No.
Okay.
And in our number 1 spot today, we have the Stalkers. This is absolutely insane. I don't think you guys are ready for this one. But the Stalkers is the name given to a group of Russians and Ukrainians that romanticize the apocalyptic environment of Pripyat. They sneak into abandoned buildings and explore them. Sometimes they even sleep over there. Also, to make matters weirder, they bring a gauger counter to see how much radiation they were exposed to on their journeys. Not only that, but apparently they also like to eat the fruit that grows in the danger zone. Like, this is their definition of fun, and they just love it. I highly recommend you don't do this, for a number of obvious reasons. But like I said, the Stalkers love this. Starting off this countdown, we have Pablo Escobar. It was a very smart decision for Christian de Boudoir and his wife to purchase Pablo Escobar's old abandoned mansion. Legend goes that Escobar would hide tons of money all over the place, so chances are there's money stashed away somewhere in the walls. And in 2016, they made a pretty miraculous discovery while excavating the property. They found a safe hidden beneath the entrance of the house. The safe was about 2 feet by 2 feet and weighed about 600 to 700 pounds. But sadly, its contents were never revealed. But because it was hidden on the property, chances are it contains a boatload of money. Moving on down at number 9, we have the vintage house. Urban explorer and photographer that goes by the name Freaktography has found some amazing discoveries over the years. Most of the stuff he finds are very old and dirty and damaged, but in rare cases he comes across some very interesting finds. In this case, he was exploring an abandoned suburban home from the 70s. Inside, it was filled with vintage gems, like vintage collectibles like old Barbie dolls, Polaroid cameras, and a bunch of figurines like Yoda, E.T., and a Star Wars figurine set. Those things must be worth a lot by now. Moving on to number 8, we have the farmhouse. So back in 2017, Reddit user Evil English decided to explore his grandparents' old abandoned house in Tennessee. While doing so, he noticed a block of concrete in the floor by the staircase. The concrete had a round cap on it, and when he pried it off, he noticed it was a safe. Yeah, a secret safe that was built into the wooden floors. The family then hired a locksmith to open the safe, and inside was a collection of valuable items. He found coins, silver bars, cash, and antiques, all worth thousands of dollars. Coming in at number 7, we have the money in the walls. In 2007, antiques dealer Jeff Beetleman was asked to scope out an abandoned house by the late daughter's owner. She had always heard stories of treasure being buried in the walls, and she wanted to see if it was true. Plus, it was an abandoned house, so she had no problem with tearing a few walls down. And turns out that this legend was true. They found a bunch of old coins from 1826 to 1964, worth $200,000. Turns out that her relatives would use a slit in the wall as like a giant piggy bank. In our 6th spot, we have the cellar. When you're exploring an abandoned house, especially the attic or cellar, chances are you're more likely to find a dead body stashed away there than anything worth money. But that wasn't the case for some workers in France. Workers were demolishing an old abandoned house when they came across exactly 600 gold coins in a container in the cellar. The coins were from Belgium and dated back to the 1870s. They featured the king from back then, King Leopold II's face on them. It said that these coins are worth about 100,000 euros, which is about 118,000 American dollars. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the movie posters. Back in 2007, a man named Blair Peter moved into a home in Alberta, Canada and began renovating it. The house was originally built in the early 1900s and it needed some work. But while lifting up some floorboards, he found tons of old original movie posters. He continued on renovating the house and found more movie posters stuffed in the crawl space and under the roof of the house. So it's thought that they were used as insulation, and obviously it wasn't worth money back then. But now, cha-ching. He found more than 360 posters. Apparently the man that owned the house was the owner of a local movie theater. So some of these posters were the ones hung up in the lobby of the theater. It was thought that Peter could get around $50,000 for some of the posters. That's one plus of buying an older house. There's a chance it's filled with hidden treasures just like this. In our 4th spot, we have the Time Capsule House. Again, another abandoned house where the urban explorer Freaktography struck gold. So story goes that he had driven by this abandoned house a number of times, but had no clue it was actually abandoned. That was until one day he noticed the windows were boarded up. A month later, the door was open. Time for him to enter. When he went inside, it was like he entered a time capsule. The house was filled with vintage items. He found old board games, antiques, and artifacts. Items that would be worth thousands. But as he always claims, he never moves anything from the house. He just photographs them and then leaves. He takes nothing but photos and leaves nothing but footprints. That's his motto. If he did take these items though, that dude would be rich by now. Coming in at number 3, we have the Mayan artifacts. Imagine being a junk removal specialist. Like, that's an actual job. You get paid to come in and clean up other people's crap. It doesn't sound that rewarding, but in this one case, it definitely was. In 2009, a team of junk removal specialists were called into an abandoned Soho apartment to clear things up. But inside, they found a bunch of valuable artifacts, including an ancient Mayan artifact, ancient figurines, and some valuable bowls and jugs. Altogether, these items are said to be worth around $19,000. Yikes. And to think that almost ended up in the landfill. Coming in at number 2, we have Superman. In 2013, a contractor was tearing down some walls in an abandoned house that he planned to renovate and then move into with his 4 children. While doing so, he found that the walls were stuffed with newspapers for insulation. But among the newspaper was a 1938 comic book showcasing the debut of Superman. It said that it was a virgin copy. That's like actually what they call it, but okay, sorry. It said that it was a virgin copy. Despite it being in not the best condition, the comic still sold at auction for $175,000. He actually would have gotten more from it, but in an argument with his relatives, the back of the cover got ripped, which decreased its value by $75,000. But still, that's one lucky man. And in our number 1 spot, we have the rolls of cash. I swear, urban explorer Freaktography has the best of luck. So he was out exploring an abandoned home near where he lived. He said that the house was abandoned for almost 30 years. While in the house setting up to take some photos, he noticed something odd sticking out from behind the mattress. It was a tin, and inside were bundles of tightly rolled up American and Canadian money. He said there was about $6,800 there. Now, he could have just made off with the money, but instead, he did the right thing. He tracked down the original owners and returned the money back to them. They had no clue the money was even stashed there, but they were incredibly grateful.
Alright, we're going to start off at number 10 now with the Pripyat Amusement Park. This is an abandoned park in Pripyat, Ukraine that was meant to be opened on May 1st, 1986. Unfortunately, just 5 days before that date, the nearby nuclear power plant at Chernobyl went into meltdown. Everyone in the area was forced to evacuate the city. As with everything else there, the park was left just just as it was. Radiation levels there have been among the highest levels recorded in the whole of Pripyat. Even today you will need special permission to get even close. Moving on to number 9 now, we have Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. This park in southern West Virginia was abandoned in 1966 after the accidental deaths of 2 children. A little girl in a pink ruffled dress died after climbing into the circling swing set. A little boy also drowned in the amusement park's swimming pond. Some say the park was cursed even before its creation, after being built on the ground where deadly murders took place between Native Americans and European settlers during the late 1700s. The park opens up sometimes for tours in the week before Halloween, and some people have sworn they've seen the little girl there in her dress, covered in blood, and just staring at them. Next up at number 8 now, we have Spree Park. This is an abandoned park in Berlin that opened in 1969. At its height, the park attracted over 1.5 million people per year. It boasted a roller coaster, 2 game water courses, a stage, a western town, and an English village. By 1999 though, the park was struggling to cope with large debts. They increased the admission fee, but that only served to drive away visitors. By 2001, they entertained just 400,000 visitors a year. The park closed the following year. In the years since then, a fire devastated major parts of the park. It's thought that someone intentionally did this. These days, Spree Park is nothing more than a creepy, burnt out husk with no certain plans for the future. Next up at number 7 now, we have Six Flags New Orleans. When Hurricane Katrina struck the Caribbean and southern US states, it devastated a lot of places. One of them was the Six Flags amusement park in New Orleans. As you can see from these images, the damage was so immense that the owners were just forced to abandon it altogether. The only visitors to the site now are trespassers who rip fences and leave graffiti. The place is also home to boars, snakes, and other animals that have taken advantage of the lack of human presence. Next up at number 6 now, we have Encore Garden. This abandoned park in Taiwan lies just east of Taichung City. It was extremely popular during the 1990s, attracting visitors from all around. Then, in unclear circumstances, the park just closed. Rumours spread about what the reason could be. Some say there was a serious accident on the huge Ferris wheel that the park was known for. Others maintained that an earthquake in 1999 caused damage that was just too serious to repair. Next up at number 5 now, we have Gulliver's Kingdom. This theme park was built in the shadow of Japan's Mount Fuji and was partially funded by the government. The ride centered around the story of Gulliver, a traveler who discovered an island full of tiny people. The park opened in 1997 but barely lasted 4 years. The reasons for its failure are cited as a lack of main attractions, but also its proximity to the notorious Suicide Forest, a place that earned its name from being a favoured suicide spot for people in Japan. At number 4 now, we have Okpo Land. This amusement park is on the outskirts of Okpo in South Korea. It was very popular during the 90s and became one of Asia's most famous amusement parks. The duck ride became a crowd favourite, but tragically people started getting seriously injured on it. Eventually someone died on it. There was outrage and Okpo Land offered no compensation or apology. In 1999, a little girl died after one of the duck carts derailed and capsized. The park was closed soon after that. The derailed cart that killed the girl was still left hanging over the edge. It became a popular site for urban explorers until it was demolished in 2011. At number 3 now, we have Daddy Park. Built in 1950, this was Belgium's first private amusement park, built for children of pilgrims visiting the nearby basilica. It was successful for many years, but that all came to an end in 2000. The Nautic jet ride was notoriously dangerous, but no improvements were ever made to it. In that year, a boy lost his arm on the ride. The park struggled on for a while, but closed down in 2002 for renovations. For whatever reason, those renovations never took place, and the park was abandoned, never to reopen again. Today, it remains almost as it was left. Parts of it were demolished, but many of the buildings and smaller attractions remain. Next up at number 2 now, we have Wonderland Amusement Park. This park in China was supposed to be the country's answer to Disneyland's Cinderella Castle. It was still in development in 2000 when the plug was pulled on the whole project. According to National Geographic, the developer, local government, and farmers all could not agree on the value of the land, and so work was stopped while the castle was only half built. Despite the owners abandoning Wonderland Park, the locals did not. They still tend to the plants that grow around the castle and apparently use the castle itself as a communal activity centre. And finally at number 1 now, we have Joyland. This park in Kansas was once the largest in the state and boasted 20 rides for kids and adults alike. It ran for more than 50 years until 2004. That was the year a 13-year-old girl fell from the Ferris wheel and sustained major injuries. The park closed down to assess its own safety. Although it planned to open again in 2006, it never never did. The owners have since demolished most of the major attractions.
Starting us off with number 10 is the bathtub. See, now I wouldn't be scared if I just happened upon a bathtub, but sadly the bathtub wasn't empty, and sadly what was inside made me gag at least 3 times. Around a decade ago, a picture circulated on the internet and caused a lot of controversy because the origin of the picture was never properly disclosed by whoever posted it. But this person found an old rusty bathtub full of brains, real human brains, preserved in a sort of yellowy liquid. The brains were definitely preserved because they were grey and firm, and some were also cut in half. It's said the place where it was found used to be an old hospital or something linked to a medical setting. The tub honestly contained probably 50 brains. I counted around 31, and those are just the ones I could see on the surface, not even the ones below. They were probably left there as a super poor storage solution, and they most likely gave whoever found them a bloody heart attack. Coming in at number 9 is the fairy. I wanted to go with either the fairy or Tinkerbell, but anyway, in 2006, a strange laboratory was discovered underneath an abandoned orphanage in London. But what blew everyone's mind was that there were the remains of hundreds of creatures down there, many of which are mythological. The collection had supposedly belonged to Thomas Theodore Merlin, an 18th century cryptozoologist who spent his whole life finding the remains of unusual creatures. The collection can now be found in the Maryland Cryptid Museum, and it contains taxidermied dragons, artifacts from ancient vampire nations, and the infant forms of werewolves. The skeletal picture that came up when I found the story did look like a tiny fairy, but yeah, skeptical as always, and the wings probably belong to a moth of some kind if I'm honest. Some people think the specimens are just works of art that the artist created himself, others say the museum isn't even open to the public. So there is a lot of controversy surrounding this one, but the fact this lab was found in the basement of an abandoned orphanage just gives me the creeps. At number 8 we have the 6th floor. This one happened at the start of 2017 near Pumpwell, India. A group of builders showed up to an abandoned building that was left mid-construction. When they reached the 6th floor of the building, they discovered the corpses of 2 men in their 30s just there. How insane. Imagine you go into work that day none the wiser and then find not 1 but 2 dead bodies. Obviously they immediately called the police, and they found out that the 2 had been murdered a few days prior and had been left to rot in the building. The placement of the bodies was very interesting. They almost seemed like they had been petrified, like in Harry Potter. That's actually not a joke. Like their hands and legs looked very out of place, like they were in the middle of something and then froze and then got killed. It's a very strange case for sure. Filling our number 7 slot is Happy Birthday Eric. This story is from Reddit user Never Enough Muppets, who said he had visited an abandoned mansion near his house in Long Island back in 2009. The house seemed to have been furnished in the 60s or 70s, and in one room he found a huge pile of mail dating back to 1995, which is presumably when the house became abandoned. Fair enough, nothing that bad thus far. He entered another room and found a lot of children's toys, except they weren't old, dusty, or broken. They seemed quite new, like they had just been recently bought. Still, he wasn't super suspicious, and he forged on to the kitchen. There he found some empty bean cans which looked like they had literally just been eaten, so now he was getting a bit weirded out. He went to the 2nd floor, and the floor was so badly damaged he had to be careful where he stood, otherwise he could have just easily fallen through. Inside one bedroom he found hundreds, and I mean hundreds of birthday cards, all addressed to someone called Eric, and all seemingly written by the same person. Wow, someone must really like you, Eric. Unbroken still, the user went up to the 3rd floor and heard some noise from a nearby bedroom. He heard a slap and then a dragging sound, and then a very filthy pair of hands appeared from out of the doorway of a bedroom. A man was dragging himself out of the room and groaning while he did it, and you can bet your ass that was the final straw for the user. He ran out of the house and never looked back. Now at number 6 is the petting zoo. In this one, a group of explorers decided to go into an old abandoned petting zoo just for fun, as you do when you're bored. They went through barn after barn, but they found something odd in one of them. One of the barns was chock full of dolls, and not just normal dolls, I'm talking naked dolls. Already I have way too many questions. Why did a petting zoo need a bunch of dolls, naked or otherwise? They have no business being in a petting zoo, so it just makes no sense to me, unless someone stored them in there after it had been abandoned, which is a possible explanation. Either way, finding little naked female dolls all over the floor is just not really my cup of tea. Next. Coming in at number 5 is the Pentagram. The West Park Hospital was built back in 1923 as a psychiatric facility in Surrey, England. It was one of 5 hospitals in the area known as Epsom Cluster. By 2003 it had become run down and most of the buildings were closed and the site was completely abandoned. By 2010 most were even demolished save a few, and before it was finally destroyed it was a very popular place for urban explorers. An urban explorer decided to take a look and entered a very old decaying room and found all the facility's fire extinguishers were in this room arranged in the shape of a huge pentagram. Yeah, you heard that right. Now I mean there are 2 possibilities: either some kids were just trying to play a prank and decided to do this, or it was the site of a sinister satanic ritual. What do you guys think? At number 4 is the mummified body. Back in 2014 in the small town of Gilbert, police started getting reports about an abandoned house that seemed to be standing on its last legs. Understandably, the police decided to go check out the house, and when they arrived they realized it wasn't abandoned, it was just neglected. To make matters worse, they found the body of a dead 90-year-old woman completely mummified in her bed, still clutching onto a blanket. Her body had been decaying for more than 4 bloody years. I can't even imagine what the house would have smelt like by then. But that's not even the last twist to this story. The house wasn't empty. The woman's 60-year-old daughter Janet was still living in the house with the body. She found her mother dead in her bed in 2010 but started panicking and worried that the police would think Janet killed her based on the condition of their house. Their house, by the way, was a hoarder house, so I'm surprised they even found the body amongst all the other things. Janet thought she'd get arrested for senior neglect, so she decided not to call the police and just left her mother in her bed, and that's where she'd been since. Filling our number 3 slot is the house. YouTuber Alien6467 posted a video in 2013 of them exploring an abandoned house they had randomly found in New York. They show the inside of the house seemingly empty, but there's graffiti and weird words and letters on the walls in a few of the rooms. One room had the word vengeance very largely written on the wall, which is not even the worst find. The walls in some of the rooms are filled with Ziploc bags stuck to the wall, and every single one has 1 coin inside of it, and some are filled with water and a coin, and they even found bags of singular coins hidden in the floor. These are just so many weird things all in one house, and I just don't understand it. Apparently if you do that with water and a coin it wards off flies or birds, but no one was even living there. When the group finally left the house, the camera focuses on the house, and in one of the upstairs windows someone was moving. On closer inspection it seemed to be a figure wearing a black robe just staring at them. That person was inside the house when they were in there just quietly listening to them, and then what they were doing. I mean, what is happening? I can't make sense of this one. Now at number 2 is the blood trail. Redditor Picoti said he was once part of a group that gave tours of an abandoned missile silo in Colorado. One day he was taking a group into one of the main rooms and through a broken hatch door, but very quickly he realized something was wrong. There was a pool of blood on the door, and it wasn't dried, it was fresh. Like someone had just broken this hatch very recently and started bleeding because of it. The blood formed a trail, and the group decided to follow it because on a tour you follow the trail of blood instead of ending the tour altogether. The trail led deeper and deeper into the complex, and it led the group into one of the silos. The blood stopped at a railed ledge looking over a 50-foot drop. Blood was all over the ledge and platform, so it was clear that whoever or whatever was bleeding had jumped. The group thought they were after an injured human, but they never ended up finding out what it was. How does anything, especially someone or something already bleeding, survive a 50-foot drop? Unless it was a massive bird and it flew, the thing went straight down to its death and then straight up to heaven. And finally at number 1 is The Thing. Back in 2008, 2 friends entered an abandoned house whilst recording the whole thing. They figured it would be some fun, and there were rumors going around that the house was also haunted, so that's the cherry on top. So they decide to go through the front door with their flashlights, and as soon as they go inside, they see a thing at the end of the room. The creature was definitely human, but it was running on all 4s, and it seemed like it had literally been waiting for them to come. The creature starts running towards the boys while making a really weird pig-like sound, and the boys run for their lives. I don't know if the video was fake or not. All I know is that if that was me, I would have tried to see if it was just a deranged person or something else entirely. I mean, who am I kidding? I probably probably would just run for my life. Starting us off with number 10 is 17 hours. This sort of reminds me of the book called Touching the Void, where these two guys are climbing this glacier or mountain, and something goes wrong and one of them has to cut the rope and let the other one loose, otherwise they were both gonna die, and the one who gets cut off lands in this crevice and actually survives. Either way, this one was shared by Reddit user Beach Knoll, whose grandpa had just gotten back from World War II and decided exploring was his new hobby. Him and his friends went into Mammoth Cave despite it being on privately owned property. Laws were a lot more lax back then, clearly. Either way, while in there with their flashlights, they had a group of people somewhere else in the cave because of all the echoing. They quickly cut the lights since the sounds didn't seem very friendly, and they waited. His grandpa and friends went deeper into the cave to lose them, and imagine this level of darkness where you can't even see your own hand in front of you. It's like a black hole with just no light coming in. They then spent 17 hours in there hiding, and the only thing getting them through it was one of their friends saying, "We didn't survive that to die in here," obviously referring to the war. And no, you didn't, my friend, so you're gonna survive that. Coming in at number 9 is the Secret Society. This one's from Reddit user Ludovico Specs and was about the basement that was under his college language lab. Turns out the place was turned into some sort of secret society in the 1800s, and the whole building used to belong to them at one point. It had hospital lights all over it, which were always just very creepy. There's an inch of water on the floor too, but the weirdest part was the main room. It had vaulted ceilings supported by pillars that had stone skulls mounted on top of them. On top of the skulls were metal spikes, which is just sus as well. Why would the secret society need just skulls on poles? It's weird. The front room also had this also with the backstage area that had a chair with a bunch of questions written on it, like were they a secret society or a cult? Now the user thought his discovery was pretty cool, so he came back the next night with some of his friends to show them. The night after that, he tried coming back again, but it had been mysteriously padlocked. No one wanted him snooping, evidently. And number 8, we have the closet. This one would have sent me running for the hills and was shared by You See The Thing Is on Reddit. The police had confiscated this house from a biker gang a few years back, and it had sat empty ever since. So the user, who works at an insurance company, had to go to the house and assess its damage. We already know insurance people always screw you over, so okay. Now while in there, he described the house as pretty normal, you know, white walls, red plywood flooring, the door locks weren't rusted yet, so it was all pretty good, pretty normal. But then they opened the linen closet to see deep scratch marks all over the inside and dents like someone was trying to escape from inside of there. The worst part was that right on the back wall was this red splatter that had been painted over but was still very visible. But the user's thoughts went to the person finally escaping to then somehow getting shot in the head, which is beyond screwed up, but I mean the scratch marks, the dents, like it makes sense. Filling at number 7 slot is Choo Choo. Now this one was shared by Reddit user Hi Dingy Doo, who shared that he used to walk along this old abandoned railroad line just to observe some wildlife, which sounds really peaceful actually, and I'm sure it was until this encounter. Over the years, the metal tracks rusted and were taken out, and all the equipment was also taken away. The whole thing became overgrown with shrubs and weeds, and so to an outside perspective, you never really would have been able to tell it had been a train track ever. Either way, one night the user went walking there with a friend, and out of nowhere they hear a voice saying choo choo. Shitting themselves, they turned around to see this old smiling man crouched in the bushes just staring at them from the dark shadows, like, who the hell are you, bro? Like, I'm just trying to vibe and observe some wildlife, like, who the frick are you? Oh hell no! I would have literally just kicked the old man. I'm really not as violent as you guys think I am, but like, I will kick people if I have to. I'm not even worried about it. Now at number 6 are the cats. This one makes my blood boil and was shared by Redditor Jetstream Wolf 12. They shared that there's this one hotel in their hometown that's super run down and that everyone just kind of breaks into fun. So they and 2 friends decided to crawl into the basement from a side entrance. Initially all they saw was graffiti, but as they went upstairs they saw bloodstains all over the floor. Was someone murdered there? Find out in a second. Now they see a bunch of dead cats that have been dragged around this room and come to the realization it's their blood. That was all they had to see before running the frick out of there, like no 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 no. That would have been me before some serial killer in the back just like hits me like she was annoying. Coming in at number 5 is the ice plant. This one was shared by Redditor Digital is 303, who was very into urban exploration as a teenager. creature. See, I was more into Gossip Girl and reading than I was exploring abandoned buildings, but to each their own. I never judge. Outwardly. Now either way, there was this old ice plant near the user's house that had burned down 35 to 30 years beforehand, which is very ironic. You're an ice plant and you burned it down. Bit of shocking behavior. Either way, the place was super overgrown, and as the user was exploring the mangled concrete and rebar, everything seemed just normal and old and burned. Disappointed, the user went home, but a few days later they hear that a corpse was pulled out of the plant by the police. The user had literally walked past a dead body and had no idea. Like, dude, open your eyes or your nose. How do you not smell a dead corpse? Apparently they smell like proper shit. Like, was your nose blocked that day, bro? What's going on? At number 4 is the cleanup. Abandoned mental hospitals are one place you will just absolutely never find me. Too much pain and suffering has been endured in these places, especially from the way they used to be treated. So this one comes from Reddit user Slothcopter, who said they explored this abandoned mental hospital that opened up sometime in the 1800s. They opened this freezer inside to find mold all over it and inside of it, and in the past they had used it to put dead bodies in there. So did those bodies mold? Did the mold come from something else? I don't know. Now in another hallway they found the word blood written in blood since they had it tested, and the word high written in spray paint, which clearly meant others had explored this place before this person did. Which is not surprising since urban explorers will literally do everything except like meth. Either way, the person decided to visit the place again a few days later, and when they did, the blood was mysteriously gone, but the high was still there. So who's coming in and out of this place and leaving messages in blood and then cleaning them up? Filling at number 3 slot is the Sprinter. This one comes from a now deleted Reddit user who went to explore an abandoned school in his town with a few of his friends. It was really hard to get into since the whole thing was boarded up, but they managed to climb up a pipe on the side of the school and get in through a window. They checked out the basement first that had been flooded, so it was very eerie just watching the stairs disappear underwater. They then checked out the gym, and as they were leaving it, they heard single footsteps coming from the other side of the gym door. Now that scared the shit out of them since this person or thing was blocking their roof exit, trajectory. The person sounded like they were just periodically walking around and then stopping, not even properly exploring. There was no light where they were coming from, which spooked the group even more. The group decided to hide out for a bit, and after seeing no one in the hallways, they decided to make a break for the roof exit door. As soon as they did, they heard someone sprinting after them, not even that far behind them. They ran the hell up those stairs and managed to get out without getting caught or killed by whoever was in there. Bro, why were you in there alone, you creep? Now at number 2 is quitting your job. This one was effed and came from Redditor Takausin, who said this happened around 13 years ago. As an electrician, him and his partner were sent out to this restoration project for a house that was built in the early 1900s. Now when they got there, they were told some info about the house, like how it had 2 owners since it was built, and how the last one was this old woman who passed away a decade prior, and there was no one left in her family that could take it. So it was auctioned off to this young couple who wanted to modernize the whole place, which is very understandable. So they got to work installing things and had to open the attic hatch to find out it was very cramped as hell up there, and so only the tiniest worker could go up and replace the intake cable. Now the user was the smallest obviously, so he went up there and could smell this old people smell, so he just assumed it was like her death smell, but it kept getting stronger. When he got up there fully, the stench was awful, and when he turned his flashlight on, to the left of him he saw 5 cat carcasses, some partially eaten by insects or whatever eat corpses, and the others were just bones and rotten skin. The dude had just had his lunch break, so he threw up on the spot and actually quit his job after this project was done. That's scarring. And finally, at number 1 is the Asylum. This one actually scared me a bit in my seat, and it's not even like I sit at my desk in a room alone. There's people around me, I was just still scared because I'm small. Shared by Reddit user Daddy's Little Screamer, when she was 16, she and her friend decided to explore the abandoned asylum grounds near her house. Firstly, if I lived in a house near asylum grounds, I would have forced my parents to move. That's not happening from any angle. There was this one tower there that had been locked for what seemed like 5 ever, but that day it wasn't, and at the top of the tower there was a light on, and they both heard a dog barking. Thinking a dog maybe accidentally got itself stuck in the tower, they looked up and were shocked. There's a silhouette in the window for sure, but it was a person's silhouette, not a dog's. The person was the one barking. Without even going into the tower, the girls ran away, and all they heard was this person call out "bye now" in a creepy sing-song voice.